Let's go. Can we go into the IRS
Yeah,
now?
sure. I just
Let's
want to
talk about it. That's
Sure.
huge.
Well, the IRS is huge, but don't forget the IRS is just part of the Federal Reserve
Yes.
System problem. And in actuality, there is no law. I've researched this very thoroughly because I kept hearing for years there's no law that you have to pay, and I sort of poo-pooed it.
Yeah, I did too.
And they make you think anybody that says that's a wacko and a kook, But there is no law. Let me just tell you straight out. There is no law that requires you to file a 1040. I researched this, and I'll tell you why there's no law. First of all, the Constitution says, okay, that there's two kinds of taxation: direct taxes and indirect taxes. A direct tax must be apportioned and done by census, which means that a direct tax, which is what a tax on your labor would be a direct tax, you can't get away from it, right? A direct tax on your labor would have to be apportioned, meaning divided amongst all the people equally, right? Mm-hmm. And an indirect tax is like an excise tax. It's like a tax that you don't have to pay if you don't use the service.
Luxury car or something.
Well, not even a luxury car can't labor, but like gasoline.
Right.
If you don't want to drive a car, if you want to take a bicycle, you don't buy gas, you don't pay the tax.
Right.
So that's called an indirect tax. But that indirect tax has to be the same in every state. It has to be uniform, okay? So there's two kinds of taxes, direct and indirect, in the Constitution. In 1894, they tried to pass an income tax on your labor. The Supreme Court said you can't do that. It's unconstitutional. They stopped. In 1913, to get around that Pollock decision of 1894, right, they passed the 16th Amendment, which said we can tax any income from any place forever, okay? And once they passed that tax, then people started paying an income tax on the labor. It became a third form of taxation. You had direct apportioned tax, you had the indirect tax, and now you had a direct tax that was unapportioned, okay? So you had three forms of taxation now. But, two things. The amendment was never ratified properly. It was a fraud, okay? And that's been proven. But the second point is this: even if it wasn't a fraud and had been ratified properly, even if it had been, okay, the Supreme Court in 8 different decisions that I have researched said the 16th Amendment gave the government no new power of taxation. They can't tax the labor of the American people, so it was finished. And in 1917, they stopped taxing it, so they did it for 3 years, right? And so there is no tax on the labor of the American people, no legal tax, and no constitutional tax. So they've made the IRS code, right, says whatever it says, but whatever it says is irrelevant because it's not in compliance with
legal.
the Supreme Court decisions,
Right.
right?
Right.
And even the IRS code, if you actually examine it, okay, even though it's irrelevant because it doesn't comply with the Supreme Court, actually, if you examine it, there's still no law that makes you pay a tax on your labor. Okay?
Right, yet every one of us, I guess there are, 69, 70 million Americans who don't, but most of the rest of us are on the treadmill and we're paying dutifully our taxes on time each year.
Well, they make you feel if you don't pay it, you're not a good citizen. That's part of their propaganda.
Well,
And that's what allows them to keep spending money.
but in fact, it's not just you saying this. What I found very compelling in your film is that you're talking with former IRS agents and investigators who were put to the task of finding out on behalf of inquiries as to whether or not this was a legal practice,
Right.
only to find out that it wasn't legal. And in fact, some of these people who were formerly with the IRS have not paid their taxes since they found out about this.
Right.
Now,
There are many IRS agents, former agents, who have left the IRS because they did the research, and they were in there before I was.
right.
And they deserve to be honored for the work they've done because it's a giant, in my opinion, it's a giant scam. And
It takes a lot of courage to do that, though, because what are we still up against?
well, the thing is that we're up against the police state because what they'll do is, even though there's no law, they threaten people with harm.
Right.
You see, but I interviewed the IRS commissioner, the ex-IRS commissioner, who wrote the tax code. He was general counsel to the IRS. He was the commissioner to the IRS, and he wrote the tax code. Okay, his name is Sheldon Cohen, and I interviewed him for the movie. And in the movie, he says, Supreme Court decisions are inapplicable to the IRS.
Interesting. And what does he give as a justification for that?
He has no
rationale?
justification because I put him into a corner. He couldn't answer the questions, so he was forced at the end to say, "It doesn't. Supreme Court decisions don't matter," which we all know is a lie.
Right.
So the IRS is not beyond the Supreme Court, right? So there is no law that allows the government to have a direct, unapportioned tax on your labor. Okay? Now, an income tax is defined by the Supreme Court as a corporate gain. You see, there is an income tax, but it's not a tax on your labor. An income tax is actually a tax on gains by corporations. That's the definition of an income tax in the Eisner versus McCumber case, if anybody wants to go look it up, right? And so, there's an income tax, but it's not a tax on you. It's a tax on corporations.
Right. And this has been pressed, this was pressed with many administrations, including the Clinton administration as well as now. And so it really does cut across political boundaries. And can you talk a little bit about the background? You have a bite in there, a sound bite in there from Judge Emmett Sullivan.
Yes.
Can you tell about how that came about? It was really just a shocking statement.
Well, what happened was that there's this group called We the People, and they served a petition on the government for the government to show the law that they're enforcing. We have a right to petition. Under the First Amendment, people have a right to petition their government to get answers to things. The government is the servant of the people, not the other way around. So they petitioned the government to get answers, and the government refused to answer the question about where the law is. So they went to court, and this Judge Sullivan said in his decision that the government does not have to answer the people's questions about where the law is.
Now that is beyond chilling.
Yes, we don't have a constitution anymore. We don't have a government run by the people anymore. We live in a totalitarian country today. That's the bottom line. We live in totalitarianism. And if you want to get it back, we have to get rid of the Federal Reserve System.